I went to visit one of these towns that's, a typical deindustrialized, what they call dying mill town, where for years when the textile mills had closed, the main street had been boarded up and vacant. And I walked that main street, and I saw on one end the neat and tidy boarded up shops, the offices that had way too much office space just because they could. And then towards the south end of the street, I began to see this main thoroughfare of this town, Lewiston, Maine, come alive. And it was coming alive because of what urban planners are always desperate for when facing the doom loop of deindustrialization, job loss, and population loss: new people. But those new people, as I began to see them with their stores, crossing the street, waving and smiling and talking to the old Mainers, were not your typical Mainers. They were Black, African, mostly Muslim refugees and immigrants in small city Maine. What could go wrong? Listen, plenty went wrong, right? Tucker Carlson talks about Lewiston, Maine as why he did this big aha about the loss of American culture and shifted to the Great Replacement theory and white nationalism, right? This zero-sum story of illegal immigrants coming and taking jobs and welfare benefits was the right-wing narrative for scores of mayors of Lewiston, Maine, and a really crazy governor of Maine who said some unbelievably racist things. Look it up. But it was also the spark in the wake of a KKK rally that came to try to chase the Somali, Congolese refugees and immigrants out of Lewiston, of a rebirth of civic culture in this dying mill town. And I had a conversation with a woman there named Cecile Thornton, who was a multi-generational Mainer. And in Maine, if you're not like really from there and really, really, really from there, they just say you're from away. All of us are just from away, right? Cecile was just like so many middle-aged, white, rural folks who have been seeing their quality of life diminish in this period of great inequality. There are two Princeton scholars named Case and Deaton who have coined this term, the diseases of despair, that have led to a loss of life expectancy for that demographic. And she was on her way with one of the diseases of despair, isolation and loneliness, which the US Surgeon General tells us is as bad for your health as a pack-a-day cigarette habit. So Cecile's family had all moved away. She was retired. She was isolated and lonely. She was depressed. She had considered suicide. And one day, on a particularly bright winter day, she went down to the Franco-Cultural Center to try to just connect with other human beings. Because you see, Cecile was part of the last group of people to come to Lewiston from away. And those were turn of the century, her parents and grandparents, French-Canadian factory workers, Catholics, who were, of course, looked down upon and discriminated against in their own way. There was a Franco-Cultural Center, and Cecile thought to herself, if I could just go and surround myself with the language from my childhood, right, I would feel alive again. So she gets into this room, but she sees these like banquet tables with bell jars in the middle and a whole bunch of dollar bills stuffed in them, and everybody's speaking in English. And she says to the guy who checked her in, well, what's going on? And he says, well, we have this rule, you're supposed to speak French, but every time you speak English, you're supposed to put a quarter in the jar, and there's a $1 maximum. So people just come in and put $1 in the jar and speak in English because nobody speaks French anymore, right? Right? Because everybody had been made fun of for being a Franco and having a French accent and speaking French at home. But the guy sees Cecile's crestfallen face and says, there is another French club. It's over in Hillview, the housing development on the other side of town. So Cecile says, great. Tuesday, 3 o'clock, she gets in her car, she goes in there, she opens the door, and she hears the room full of the most beautiful French she's actually ever heard. And everybody in there is an African Francophone refugee or immigrant. Right? That day, she has the longest conversation she's had since her mother and father passed away. She becomes a every single week member of the other French club. And she decides actually to combine the French club so that today, to combine the two French clubs, so that today, on any given, every other afternoon, when you go to the downtown Maine Franco-Cultural Center, you can see mostly Black, African, Francophone people teaching white elderly Mainers the language that they had long ago traded away for assimilation and belonging into whiteness.